You know, we all think we know what peace is, but what if the way we've been taught to think about it is, well, just plain wrong? What if peace is way more than just the silence after the fighting stops? Today, we're going to dig into an idea that really forces you to rethink the whole concept of peace itself.
So let's kick things off with the big question that drives this whole explainer. What if peace isn't simply what's left over when you take conflict away? What if it's something more active, more complicated, and honestly, a lot more interesting than we usually give it credit for?
All right, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll unpack a major bias and how we even study this stuff. Then, we'll look at an early attempt to fix it, this idea of negative versus positive peace. From there, we'll introduce a really powerful new way of looking at it, apply that to the puzzle of South America, and finally, we'll land on a whole new paradigm for understanding why peace actually sticks around.
Okay, so first things first. The big problem in the field of international relations is that when we say we're studying peace, a lot of the time we're actually studying war.
And this quote from the historian John Lewis Gaddis just nails it, doesn't it? For decades, academics have been totally obsessed with why peace fails. The conflicts, the crises, the breakdowns, instead of asking the opposite question, why does it succeed?
And here's the thing, when you only focus on failure, you end up with a massive analytical bias. You learn a ton about what goes wrong, but you stay pretty clueless about what goes right and, more importantly, why. It's kind of like trying to understand what makes a person healthy by only ever studying diseases. It just doesn't give you the full picture.
And this chart right here, this gives you a sense of just how skewed it is. If you mapped out the research, it would look pretty much like this: a giant mountain of war and conflict, and this tiny little molehill over here for the study of why peace endures.
So this bias leads to a really simple and, frankly, lazy assumption, which Jeffrey Blaney sums up here. The logic is, well, if this thing causes war, then not having that thing must cause peace, right? But as we're about to find out, the real world is so much more complicated than that. Peace isn't just an empty space where war used to be.
All right, so let's move on and look at how researchers first tried to add a bit more nuance to the conversation. And that brings us to this really important distinction between negative and positive peace.
And we have to give credit where it's due. The groundwork for this was really laid by a couple of pioneers in the field, Johan Galtung and Kenneth Boulding.
So they came up with this really useful split. On one side, you've got negative peace. Think of this as the bare minimum. It's just the absence of fighting. We're talking about things like ceasefires or heavily guarded borders. There's a ton of tension, it's fragile, it's what you'd call an unstable peace. But then, on the other side, you have positive peace. This isn't about what's absent, it's about what's present. Things like cooperation, social justice, trade, diplomacy. This is a stable peace because it's built on connection, not just on keeping people apart.
Now, this was a huge leap forward, for sure, but it left a really big nagging question on the table. If that negative peace is so unstable, then how on earth do you explain rivals, countries that have every reason to go to war, somehow managing to stay at peace for decades, sometimes even generations? This framework just didn't have a good answer for that puzzle.
And this is exactly where the work of Félix E. Martín comes in and completely changes the game. He offers up a new typology, basically a new system for classifying peace and war that helps us finally solve that puzzle.
So, the fundamental question he's asking is this: how can we build a better model, one that actually reflects the messy, complicated reality we see out in the world?
Okay, this matrix right here is the absolute core of his idea. It looks simple, just a 2x2 grid, but it is incredibly powerful. So look, across the top, you have whether the conditions for conflict, things like border disputes or fights over resources, are there or not. And then down the side, you have the actual outcome. Did you get war or did you get peace? And that gives us 4 totally different scenarios.
So let's just walk through this. The top right and bottom left boxes are what traditional theories would expect. You get normal war when there are reasons to fight and a war happens. Makes sense. You get normal peace when there aren't any major issues, so things stay peaceful. Simple enough. The top left, anomalous war for no reason, is pretty much illogical. It doesn't really happen. But that fourth box, that's the one that changes everything. Anomalous peace. This is that fascinating, overlooked situation where all the ingredients for war are there, but peace breaks out instead. That's the puzzle we're trying to figure out.
Okay, so theory is great, but let's put this framework to the test. And there's a perfect real-world case study that shows this anomalous peace in action: South America.
Now, if you look at a map of the continent, it is just littered with the classic things that should, by all accounts, lead to war. You've got long-standing territorial disputes, like between Colombia and Venezuela. You have fights over resources, like the one that almost led to war between Chile and Argentina. And you have these deep historical rivalries, like between Ecuador and Peru.
And yet, with all of that dry tinder just lying around, the spark of a major war between nations has been almost entirely absent for the better part of a century. Now, according to the old theories, this just shouldn't be the case. It's a puzzle. It's an anomaly.
And this gets us right to the core of what anomalous peace is. It's not some happy accident. It is a managed condition. It's a state where peace is being actively and, a lot of the time, very carefully held together through things like smart diplomacy, strong deterrence, or just shared regional values that keep those underlying conflicts from boiling over.
So let's bring this all home. Understanding this idea of anomalous peace, it really forces a huge shift in our perspective. Peace isn't just what happens when war stops. The single biggest takeaway here is this. We absolutely have to stop thinking about peace as just a passive, accidental lull between wars. We need to start analyzing it as what it is, an active, structured condition that has to be built and maintained, sometimes against some pretty serious odds.
And that really brings us full circle back to our opening question. It turns out peace isn't the absence of conflict at all. Nations are always going to have disagreements. Real, lasting peace is about the successful management of that conflict.
And what's cool is this framework doesn't just explain the past, it gives us a brand new lens for looking at the world today. So, I'll leave you with a final thought to chew on. As you look around the globe, what other regions might be living in this state of anomalous peace, actively managing conflict every single day? The answer to that question tells us an awful lot about where our world is really headed. Thanks so much for watching.